Now we're testing gauges, which I've already tested them and I kind of know the answer, but to help people out that might be wondering, I wasn't getting when the fuel gauge was hooked up, it was reading 3/4 full even though the tank was bone dry. And there's some simple ways to check and see what's going on. Here I've got the orange lead wire. It comes from my gauge and goes to the sending unit, which isn't in right now. We'll cover that in a moment. But turn the key on, make sure we got a fuse. Normally, if no one's messed them up, I believe it's the left fuse here is the gauge cluster. Turn the key on, and then you can do it while it's still hooked up to the sending unit. Ground it out. In this case it's not, so I just need to, I'm going to touch it to this screw here that's bare. But when I ground it out, it should make it go all the way to full. So that's a pretty good sign the gauge is good. Which it should be, because it's actually a brand new gauge. That's what made me think that it wasn't the, or that was the sending unit, because I knew the gauge was good, or it should be good. So, we've determined the gauge is good. Because the grounding wire goes out, or makes her go to full, goes back to empty. Same principle works with the temperature gauge. I will get a wire and ground it out to demonstrate. Well, on these Perkins, they've got the sending unit hid way up there. You could disconnect the wire. I'm just going to hook a jumper to it. And then, that manifold bolt ought to be a good ground. And I've got nothing. Oh, there we go. Key on, and she jumps all the way over to full. So that's a good sign that the gauge is all right. And all the sending unit does is complete the ground in varying amounts of resistance depending on water temperature or how full the fuel tank is. So if your gauge is reading full on both, no matter where it's at, could be your wire has rubbed through and shorted out, creating a ground, tricking the gauge into going. In that case, disconnect the wire at the gauge, and if the gauge stays full, then you've got a faulty gauge. You can also could have a faulty sending unit. So if you disconnect the wire and it goes back to empty, or the temperature drops back down, then you know your sending unit is faulty somehow or another. Pretty simple to diagnose once you know how they work. Fuel tank could possibly be, you know, if everything's painted up good or just crusty, it could be a bad ground. Okay, so we're at 31.4 ohms, which should be roughly full. It's not going to peg it. As the tank gets empty, the resistance goes up. But unlike that used one that had spots that were good and spots that were bad and jumping around, this one is consistent. So this one would have worked in spots and not in others. So it's going. We just need to adjust adjust the two, adjust this new one to be like the old one, and we're good to go. Get the pivot points even. It's not rocket science. You know, if they're off a skosh, I guess it just depends on how exact you want your fuel gauge to read. These new floats are a porous plastic. One thing I've found that can go wrong with these old style is, I can see it just a little bit here, but they were set up where they would touch the bottom of the tank when they were empty, and years of guys running them down by empty and sloshing around, it would wear a hole through them, get fluid or fuel in the float, and it wouldn't float anymore. So some of those you can repair by putting another float on if you want. I am going to take this over and stick it in the tank real quick just to make sure. I'm going to wrap this wire around to make sure it doesn't hit the bottom before I put the float on it. Good God. If I had a square tank, I don't think the shape of or the length of this part would matter, but the odd shape of this 1850 tank, okay. Yep, that fits better. I had to cut the excess off from the so basically just line her up with the center there. Snip that off. Just like that, we got a new sending unit. Put the gasket on. Take off the warning for the people of California. The bolt pattern is specific on this. To make sure the gauge always or the sending unit faces the right way. That's not it. You'll notice there's a staple in the gasket. It's barely visible, but that does have a purpose. It helps ground the body of the sending unit to the tank, so you get a complete the circuit, which always gets me. They got these new screws that come with it that are got little gaskets on them. And anyways, there is a purpose for that little staple. Let's get her in a tank. I question how well that's going to stay in. Time will tell. Oh, one thing I don't like about these will fit, which is adjustable, but they got way too much stud sticking out here, and it can hit the hood of your tractor and ground out and make you think you got a full tank when you don't. So best thing to do is to cut the excess off from there. Then put like I take a piece of old inner tube or something like that and lay over the top of this once I got that smooth to prevent it from shorting out against the hood. Oliver originally used a piece of foam. That would work too. Then it doesn't rub against your hood so much. Normally the wire went along the side of the hood there. Let's now see if the gauge reads empty with the key on. Key off, key on. Guess we'll know for sure when I get fuel in it, but at least it doesn't go up when there's no fuel in it. But if for some reason your new sending unit isn't working, make sure your sending unit is ground. You can do a continuity check. We'll do that right now. A multimeter is like a good woman. You don't have to understand how it works, but it's still nice to have one around. All I'm doing is going between the frame of this. You can see when it's got continuity, because they're both touching the same piece of metal, it beeps. Pretty simple. But I will try the inside of the tank through the filler cap here. Nothing. So that little staple in the gasket is not making contact. Let's try torquing her down a little more. If not, we'll just run a ground wire from one of these screws to the frame somewhere. See if that makes a difference. Yeah, even when I go to the screw, so I'm going to have to run a ground wire somewhere on here to complete the ground, because it is just not wanting to seal or go through that gasket. Their staple is inadequate. Come on. Yeah, see the screws are, I don't even have to remove the little rubber thing under the screw. When I go touch the inside of the tank to that screw, the screw is grounded, but this is isolated. So we'll make a ground wire to fix it. Oh, any old screw will do. Guess I don't really have to take the gasket off, because as long as this ground wire, let's flip that over, touches the metal, it should work. I'm glad I tested this and didn't just trust that it was going to work. Well, that made it to the floor. Put this in continuity mode. So, what am I trying to do? Oh yeah. I'll go inside the filler neck here where I got bare metal. Still nothing. I must not have been getting it good. There we go. Tank is now grounded. I'll go back to a bolt here on the dash. Yep, definitely got continuity. So, now it should work. And we're back to reading full. What the heck? So I figured out the problem. These new gauges have a ground post on them. I kind of figured as long as they, oh, well now that one ain't lighting up. It used to. It lost its ground. So there's a problem. Turn the lights on, that light gauge doesn't light up now. So I guess I will make a ground wire for that one. When I ground the gauge out, let me hook that up. And once I get the ground hooked up, the light comes back on and the gauge goes back to empty. So maybe I'll just run a wire to that ground post and then I don't have to worry about it getting the ground through the paint. I can try tighten the nuts up a little bit. Let's see what I can do. Okay, I loosened it up, wiggled a little bit to get a little better ground, and got her to connect. And now it reads empty, and the light works. These new gauges do have the bottom post has a ground symbol on it. At least the fuel one does. The others do not. But if you can get it to ground through the frame, it will work. I'm probably messing with it and gonna screw it up. It still would have needed this ground wire, because doing my testing, it did not make connection. I just ran it down to a bolt here. Normally there's a battery tray here, and it was pretty ratted out in this tractor. And I plan on running a single battery down there in that battery box. So rather than trying to find another battery tray for up here, I'm just gonna go without for now. But it would fit underneath these, come here, hold the battery, and I feel that if I'm going to do a single battery down there, you can still get these battery boxes pretty reasonable. They're readily available, and if it's going to leak, I'd rather have it leak down there and ruin that replaceable battery box than have a leaky battery up here that's going to just ruin everything and go down and take out paint. So my plan is to have no battery up here. Maybe I need to make like a drink holder there, and I can pop the battery lid forward, put my drinks in, then when I'm on a tractor ride or something, plans. The Oliver oil pressure gauge is mechanical, so if it's not working, it has nothing to do with electric. It's pretty much a bad gauge, because it's just a copper line that comes from there, goes to the engine to pick up pressure. The amp gauge is also, I mean, you could have broken wire somewhere, but if it's not reading right, either your charging system ain't working, or the gauge is bad, or you have bad connection. And the easiest way is just to check, see that you've got 12 volts on each post. We went over the temp gauge. Tachometer is mechanical, so it pretty much either the cable's bad, or it could be the tach drive on the engine. Same thing with a speedometer, or it's the gauge. And those are pretty simple to diagnose. Just start taking it apart. Easy thing to do is take the cable off the other end and spin the end by hand, and if you see the needle go up, then your gauge is all right, your cable's all right, and it's something in the drive. If the gauge doesn't work, your cable could be shot. Try unhooking it from this end. Now I can get some fuel in it and a few other odds and ends. So there you go, how to check out gauges and see which is wrong, which is right.